Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Richard Tice. Now, Richard is a British businessman, politician who has been leader of Reform UK since March of this year. Richard, it's fabulous to get you on the Godcast. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks very much for having me. It's exciting, and I suspect it may be different from some of the normal interviews I do.
Well, I certainly hope so. Whereabouts in the world are you today?
I'm in central London. I live in central London, and this is sort of, where obviously most of my political activities take place, albeit my sort of business interests are all over the country.
Yeah, Richard. Sometimes when I get guests on it, I have to really dig deep to get the questions, but with you they flowed quite naturally. So I'm going to crack on because there's lots of things I want to ask you. First of all, you are a highly successful businessman. Why do you engage in politics?
It's I've always actually been interested in politics for many years. I think actually when I was even in my 20s, I said I would want to be in business for 2 or 3 decades and then try and make a difference, shape and influence things, and so go into something else. And in a sense, I've now somehow reached the age of 57, and that's sort of where I've got to. I was running a big stock market listed multinational business until 2014. And I stepped away from that voluntarily so that I could essentially spend some time in politics. I got involved obviously in the whole Brexit referendum. And then that was really a stepping stone to saying, actually, there's so much more where I think, I can try and help shape and influence.
Yeah. Was politics a mealtime conversation as a young guy? Was it on the agenda often?
I think it was a conversation because I made it a conversation because it was an interest. In reality, very often people would say, "Oh, not that again." I think it's politics shapes the way our lives are led. It's really important, but for most people, understandably, actually, most people think about politics a couple of minutes a week, and I understand that. But the reality is, it is really important in terms of the decisions that are made, the quality of the people involved. It does have a direct impact on people's lives.
Yeah. How much do you think we, as humans, are indoctrinated by our mothers and our fathers? I think about this from religion as well. I mean, I hold a view that a lot of religious views are held because that was the view of their parents. Do you think that applies to politics as well?
In terms of being passed out, it certainly did. That traditional political views passed down generations, whether it was in a Labour household or whether it was in a Conservative household or other parties, without question. I think that's changing. I think it's changed for a whole bunch of reasons. And that actually, I think in society generally, younger people are there's a flattening of society between sort of the boss at the top of a triangle of a big business and younger workers coming in. There's less tiers of management. Younger people are much more willing to challenge in a variety of ways the accepted establishment norms. And I think that's the same in politics. I think you get the right to vote in most places at the age of 18, and I think there's a greater willingness to say, well, do you know what, I might lend my vote, because that's actually what you're doing in each election, whatever it is. You're lending your vote to someone or to a party or to a cause for that election. And I think what we've seen in the last 5 years is people are more willing to lend their vote. And so when we had the European elections 2 years ago, a lot of people lent their vote to us and then realized that actually the sun still came up the following day. There was still bread on the shelves and it wasn't so bad. And then people say, oh, okay, well, I can look at that again and think about it. And that's a great thing, I think.
Yeah. And who were your political heroes as a young man? And what were the hot potatoes of the time that really kind of evoked your interest?
My main political hero, obviously, I didn't know, is Churchill. I just think in terms of the strength of character, the courage. He made some huge mistakes along his whole career, but he had this extraordinary ability to bounce back from them, and in a very principled way to keep battling for what he believed in. And eventually circumstances evolved that proved him right on the biggest one of all, which was in the late 1930s, leading into the Second World War. So he's a huge hero. And actually my grandfather knew him quite well and used to send him cigars for Christmas. And we've got a couple of lovely thank you letters from Churchill in sort of the 50s and 60s, early 60s. Thanking my grandfather for the cigars. So that's my first hero. And then my second political hero, more contemporary, is Jack Kennedy, JFK, from the United States. When I was at school, I read at A-level politics, and that involved a big element of that was US politics. So JFK has been a sort of an intriguing sort of, it's just someone I guess I've always been interested in, looked up to, and like all of us, you know, none of us are perfect. He definitely had his flaws and frailties, but again, someone with real courage, who you know, politics, trying to be a leader politically in any country is difficult, particularly America, and it's difficult in America today. Equally, I guess it was very difficult in America in the early 60s, and he took that on, and sadly it was fairly short-lived. And then interestingly, his brother Bobby Kennedy, again potentially one of America's greatest presidents they never had. So those are sort of really interesting people that in a sense I've used them as sort of strong, courageous leaders. They had a strong view, they had a real principle, and they went for it.
Mm. And what about on the left of politics? Not necessarily people you were your heroes, but people you greatly respected. You know, people like Tony Benn come to mind in my mind.
Yes, he would be literally, as you're asking that question. I mean, that's absolute first and foremost. He, again, strong, principled views, and he just told it as he saw it, whether you agreed or disagreed. And actually, in some areas, you can agree with someone in one area but disagree in another. Mm-hmm. And Tony Benn had incredible principles, and on the European issue, actually, he and I shared very similar views. And I think that he had a real touch for the real issues that affected people's daily lives. So he would be on the left, he would be right up there as one of the most interesting people.
Thanks, Richard. Just thinking about some of the political issues at the moment, I was interested to know what you thought about salaries for members of Parliament, Richard. It's been in the news, and Peter Bottomley with being kind of dragged over the coals for suggesting that £80,000 was too much. But I had quite an interesting chat with Jeffrey Archer about this, and his view was, if you want the best people, you've got to pay the going rate. And he talked about a conference he was with where some of the business leaders from the female fraternity were, and he suggested, why aren't you a politician? And many of them kind of suggested, well, it's because I'm on £250,000, £300,000 a year. It's just not worth it. What's your position on that?
It's a great question. And I think, look, fundamentally, I think there are too many politicians. I don't think you need 650 MPs, particularly when you've actually devolved a lot of the responsibilities down to Scotland, down to Wales, in terms of devolution, to Northern Ireland. So I think the cost of, we've just got too many politicians, and you could make, I could easily subscribe to the view that you could have half the number of politicians, you could double the pay for that half, and you might end up with the same politicians. You might end up with a bunch of different people applying to get involved. I think it's, there's a lot of people who go into politics because for the right reasons. They think they can make a difference in a constituency, in a community. But equally, I think there's too many failed people who've sort of been average or failed in another walk of life, and they've sort of bundled into politics. Overall, rather than respond to the pure financials of it, I don't think it's about, is it 20 grand too much, 20 grand too little? I just think that it's too tough. It's so tough now. It's so difficult. The grief for your family, frankly, for the scars on your own back, for your children, if you've got children, is really tough. And that puts off, regardless of the money, that puts off some really high quality people who would otherwise be fantastic. And it's the quality of the individuals involved, or the lack of quality, that troubles me the most. And the sort of the requirement to climb the greasy pole of politics to try and get to ministerial positions is, I guess it's like any big corporate. It's an inevitable fact of life, and therefore too many people sacrifice their principles and what they truly believe in order to climb the greasy pole. And I think in terms of when you talk about the impact on people's lives, the way you run a country, that has really significant consequences. And I'm afraid I think we're seeing that as we speak. I mean, we may or not come to talk about energy, the cost of living, the cost of trying to keep your house warm, which is pretty critical to everybody. What's gone on recently and what's going on is, I'm afraid, is driven around ideology rather than what people actually believe in.
And what's your position in terms of the media's role in political debate, Richard? It strikes me that quite often, and you may well have been party to this in your media performances, where there's normally one person on the left and one person on the right, and the presenter normally throws the bomb in and then just let the two people go at it like cat and dog. I personally don't think that's helpful. In fact, what I like about what I do on the Godcast is I give people an opportunity to speak and tell me what you think. And that doesn't seem to be on British television very often.
Correct. But I think that may be shifting. So actually, the head-to-head, where, as you say, the interviewer sort of lobs in the question and then two people go at each other, I think that sort of Punch and Judy stuff is turning people off. It's interesting, for example, BBC Question Time, audience viewing numbers absolutely just gone through the floor, collapsed. And I think people do prefer to listen to someone being interviewed, giving their views, however long that is, 5-10 minutes, and then they disappear, and then the interviewer asks someone from the other side for their views. And I think you get a healthier, more respectful debate, and then people can put forward their arguments, their views. And I think generally that, and so I actually prefer to do the one-to-one rather than the head-to-head. I think I think the whole Brexit thing made that so toxic, so difficult, and it does. You get exhausted by it, and it ends up putting people off, and that's actually not good for. It's just not good for democracy and sensible debate where it gets too scary.
Yeah, and regarding your own relationship with the Conservative Party, Richard, you were part of the political party for a number of years, and now you're not. What's your kind of assessment of them, from the outside looking in? And it used to be Teflon Tony, didn't it? But Boris, nothing seems to stick to Boris. What's your kind of views on the Tories at the moment?
They are essentially, they're the most successful political party in the UK in terms of their ability to hold on to power, and they will adapt and change their stance. I mean, they can turn on a sixpence if they think there's more votes in it. So that they're completely ruthless, utterly unprincipled, but great salespeople is the reality. Boris, whatever you whatever anybody thinks about him, he's a brilliant salesman. And the truth is, we all love a good salesperson pitching to us, selling us a product. And the truth is, most of the time, they overpromise and underdeliver. Occasionally, it's the reverse. I think Boris is the absolute master of selling us all a product with zero prospect of delivery. He's the ultimate brilliant salesman. I'm an optimist. For me, the glass is always half full. It's never half empty. I just think that, and there's another thing about Boris, which is that, we've all got frailties. I think Boris has got so many frailties. All of us can see one of our own little frailties somewhere in Boris. And I think that's part of his appeal to people.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I don't mean this next question to sound crass, Richard, because it is quite a crass question, but what is the point of the Reform Party? I don't mean that to be rude, but what is your purpose as leader of the Reform Party?
So essentially, I think we're an incredible nation, an amazing nation, but I do think that we are really badly led, really badly managed, and really badly governed, both by our government in place at the moment, by the leaders of our civil service, by the leaders of other key institutions that affect our lives. I think the leadership of the police is woeful, for example. I think the leadership of the BBC is woeful, for example, and another institution. So we're a great nation. We're like a great nation of lions and lionesses being really badly led. And what Reform wants to try and do is to say, look, there's many areas of our life where we need better leadership. We've got to reform the way this great nation is run, because yes, it works for some people, but there are far too many people for whom actually it doesn't work at the moment. And so in a sense, we're putting forward what we think is common sense solutions to the challenges we face, whether it's on, we want to cut taxes. I want to have a bold vision about having zero waiting lists. And so you've got to reform the way healthcare is organized. And, I think absolutely crucial issue at the moment, we've got to reform our whole approach to energy. We've got an absolute crisis of energy prices going through the roof as we speak, because of the energy policies that this government has adopted for a decade. And we're sitting on golden gas under our feet, and yet our politicians have chosen for ideological reasons not to access it. So yeah,
you're referencing shale gas there, Richard, is that right?
I'm referencing shale gas. So in a sense, I love and believe in the amazing potential of this country. I just think we're very badly led, and we're not. We did Brexit in order to unleash our potential, and I fear that we're not going to do that properly. And that's the reform. And democracy is much better if voters have got more choices, more open debate, a broader range of options, and I think people that just tell it as they see it. And in a sense, in some cases, it's easier for someone like us at Reform to set out some bold visionary ideas because we're not part of the establishment.
Yeah, and I want to just you've kind of brought Brexit up very nicely there. I want to ask you about Brexit and where you feel we are today. I guess some people who voted for Brexit, Richard, maybe are asking themselves now, I voted Brexit, are asking themselves, am I responsible for the increase in gas prices? Am I responsible for a shortage of lorry drivers? And I never thought I'd see more than one pig gate, but am I responsible for, a lack of butchers being able to cull our pigs safely? So is Brexit responsible in any way for these things that are happening, in your opinion?
For none of those things whatsoever. Absolutely not. And you can, in my view, that you should sleep easy at night, that actually we absolutely did the right thing. We are in control of our own destiny. And there are certain areas where some great things are happening. For example, I'm delighted that some of the lowest paid, the least well off, are now benefiting from proper wage increases, because wages were suppressed by big businesses for 15 years because they could get lots of, essentially unlimited amounts of cheaper labor from elsewhere. and that suppressed wages. So it's great that lorry drivers can earn more. It's great that supermarket shelf stackers, warehouse workers are earning more. That's part of what I see as the Brexit dividend. And there's other things like, for example, this big new global deal we've done with the US and Australia on the submarine deal. That's a geopolitically important deal that I don't think we could have done as members of the European Union. We had the freedom to do it, to buy the vaccines in the way that we did because we essentially were on our own. And while some people dispute that, the reality is that none of the other 27 EU nations ran their own vaccine program. They all basically went under the umbrella of Brussels, and that held them back. So look, we've got control. There's always challenges, and in a sense, trading relations with any country, any party, is never static. It's never held in aspic. It'll always evolve. But I just think we're now in control of ourselves. And sure, we'll make some mistakes. But the great thing about mistakes is voters have got the ability to fire the people who make the mistakes. And we've also got the ability to learn from the mistakes and change course. And in business, that's what you do. And I'm a businessman. That's what, when we make an investment, you then monitor it, tweak it, manage it. And if it's working, great. And if it's not, change it or cancel it.
Richard, do you think there's a new opportunity for manufacturing as well? I was reading and listening today about container ships being stacked up at Felixstowe, and how much actually comes imported from China. I'm in an industrial place in the northwest that used to thrive through its manufacturing. Do you think we can ever see a return to those halcyon days where we start manufacturing stuff on a great scale?
I do think there's huge potential, actually, because we've left. And there's no question we've learned through this COVID crisis that we've become, as a nation, far too reliant on, for parts of our critical products, far too reliant on the global supply chain. And the just-in-time supply chain, it's great when everything works, when the sun's shining, but the moment there's a hiccup, then it really did bite us where it hurts. Whether it was on PPE, whether it's now what we're seeing with energy. And so I do think that there's important areas where we need to be self-reliant. We need to be more self-reliant on food. 40 years ago, we used to produce about 80% of what we consume. That number now is less than 60%. So, and actually with new technology, with vertical farming and things, there's great opportunities for farmers. There's no question that, I'm a great fan of renewable energy. But I want solar panels designed and manufactured and built and installed. I want that to happen here in the UK. Great new technology, new potential jobs that, as you say, for example, where I stood in Hartlepool, that's part of a new Freeport area, fantastic manufacturing area. So yes, we need to be more self-reliant. And that's one of the lessons we've learned. And one of the ways you have to do that to make it work financially, you've got to have access to your own cheap, reliable energy.
And just going back to what you said about shale gas, Richard, I can see the guys from Extinction Rebellion, kind of hardly rejoicing at that comment. Well, these environmental matters become matters of morals and ethics. Are you sympathetic to people like Extinction Rebellion?
I think the reality is that we all care about the environment. We all want cleaner air, and there are some things that we can impact. But it's really important to set the context. The climate's been changing for thousands of years, and it will continue to change for thousands of years. And the majority of factors that cause climate change, we know very little about. And we have no control over, whether it's volcanic activity, whether it's sea level oscillation, whether it's solar variability. These are huge things, massive, that we have no impact on. On greenhouse gases, yes, we should reduce them, but we've got to do it in a way that is proportionate and strategic and affordable. If you end up with a situation that is unaffordable, and we're not far from it now, we're just at the foothills of this, then people can get very upset very, very quickly. So our plans involve having a diverse range of energy sources, investing in new technology, but alongside that, you've got to have an affordable, reliable core of energy. And in our case, that's gas, and it's our energy. Why should we send our money overseas to buy someone else's energy when we've got the energy literally under our feet? So we can create jobs, we can create reliable, cheap energy ourselves and keep the money here. But yes, let's invest in all the different opportunities for technology as we go green. Yeah? And I was sort of leading from the front. I've got an electric car. My deputy leader's got an electric car. So I'm not going to let anybody say we're deniers. We're not. And I love technology, but we've just got to do it in a smart, strategic way. And there's no point us virtue signaling, hair shirting ourselves, given that we're just 1% of global CO2 emissions, give or take, when countries like China represent almost 30%, and they're still building coal-fired power stations. And arguably, they're literally laughing at what we're doing, because the more that our energy becomes more expensive, we outsource more production and jobs to China, and therefore we become more reliant on them.
Thank you, Richard, for your views on that. I want to just quickly touch on religion, because it's the Godcast. Do you think that religion and politics mix?
Well, that's a great question. It certainly does in America. Here in the UK, actually, I think people don't really. Overall, I think people would rather it's kept separate. And if you're into politics, I think everybody's completely relaxed about whatever religion you may or may not practice. But actually, they want to hear your political views, not really your religious views, is my sense of how I've grown up with it. In the same way that actually, I think UK voters are frankly pretty uninterested in politicians' private lives. Really remarkably relaxed about that compared to perhaps some other countries. I think it's just about most people, I think, in the UK, just tell us what you believe in politically, how you're going to impact on my life, how you're going to change things for the better. And I'm not really interested in the rest of your personal life.
Yes, I'm interested by that. Do you support like bishops being in the House of Lords, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I don't like the House of Lords overall as it's currently constituted. I think it's massive. It's got all sorts of problems, and it's basically become a sort of a recipient for political favors and donors. And so I want to abolish it in its current form. But I think it should be replaced with something, and part of that is replacing it with you need expertise that can sort of stand back and not be subject to political and voters' whims, and say, actually, whether it's legal expertise, whether it's property expertise, whether it's religious expertise. So I think you could have almost a mix and match and say, yes, actually, there is a role for that. The sort of the voice of wisdom. I hesitate to say that, a bit of grey hair, but you know what I mean. I think I think there is a role for that, but I also think probably on a time-limited basis, so that you then say, right, whether you're in for, let's say, 10 years, 8 to 10 years, and then you move on and someone else comes in. So you could end up with a second house, a second chamber that is part appointed and part elected, and there's a time limit on it. And then, because what I'd like to do is get the best of all worlds. Get the experience, get the independence, but have some elected accountability, and possibly also some regional accountability. There's on the second chamber, for example, we probably need more voices from the regions and less from sort of being London centric.
Yeah, Richard, I've really enjoyed talking to you, but there's just couple of questions I need to get off my chest because it affects where I'm working. I work in Burnley. I never thought I would be running a food bank. I run a food bank, at our church, and I actually feel that I can't get rid of it. And if I get rid of it, it will have a really difficult consequence on the people that use it. And the government have reduced this, taken away this £20 universal credit, which is probably not much more than a couple of cups of coffee in central London, but it does make a difference to people's lives. What's your party's position in terms of the welfare system and you know, the food banks per se, and why on earth do we need them?
So I've campaigned just in recent weeks. I've said that they shouldn't have removed the universal credit, the extra £20 a week. I think it's completely the wrong time to do that, because we know that people's bills are going up, and it's the least well off, the most vulnerable, who, of course, proportionately, this hits them the hardest. And so that's why I think it's the wrong time. It's incredibly insensitive. And look, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have food banks, for sure. And but you know, they have, you know, the growth of them does reflect. I think it reflects a situation where, in a sense, for the least well off, the lowest paid, actually wages just haven't kept up with what they should have done. The example I give is, in about the last, for about a decade, between 05 and 15, there was zero real wage growth, zero. In the 1990s, there was real wage growth of almost 3% a year. That's a compound, that's a 30% difference. That's massive. And there's a reason for that. And I think all of that has led to, a raft of consequences. I think the Tories' austerity program, and when they came into office, when they said they had no money, actually they did. They just ideologically wanted to pursue a very tight financial policy. That led to shutting lots of important facilities in communities, youth clubs and such like. So across the board, I think that there are huge lessons to learn. I don't think they have been learned. And in a sense, you know, the incredible work that you're obviously doing in Burnley with food banks, it's a reflection that we've got a lot wrong, that's a requirement. I don't know how many people rely on your food banks. How many people are you helping a week, for example?
Well, we're kind of peaking about 60 bags of food a week.
Yeah, so you know, that's really material, and you know, there are many people like you know, providing the same sort of services across the UK, and it's a reminder that there's a lot to be done. But the way to do that, coming back to what our solutions, you know, we want to cut taxes for the least well off. We've got to create higher growth, and with higher growth, you get higher wages, and that then lifts, a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to create a higher growth economy so that wages go up, but the beneficiaries of that are the lowest paid in society. The people who are struggling the most. That has to be the right way forwards, and in a sense, that's very much what drives part of our economic policies.
Yeah. Well, you'd be very, very warmly welcome to, if you're up these parts in East Lancashire, you'd be very warmly welcome to come and spend a morning with us at our.
I would love to do that. That would be great. Yeah, because you're not that far. We've got. I'd love to do that. I've got. I come up to Wigan occasionally.
Okay.
For some business interests, which is obviously not that far away, so we could organise that.
That would be lovely. Yeah, and just the conversations are far more revealing than a debate sometimes, and it'd just be great to see it. So, Richard, thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy,
fantastic.
And I send you my best wishes and regards to everybody. And thank you so much for coming on the Godcast. Thank you.
Fantastic. I really appreciate you taking an interest. Thanks a lot.
God bless.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks. God bless. Bye.